Good morning. How's everybody doing? Great to be learning with you on a Friday, Yom Shishi. Let's light up the darkness. Who's in the house? Yehud in South Carolina, Joe in the Inland Empire, Bella in Florida, Melissa in Great Neck, Guy in Ohio, Yosef in New Jersey, Gordo in Scotland, Shandor in the Bronx, Bill in mid-Missouri, Charles in Missouri, Ella in Southern California, Franco in Trieste, Italy at dinner time, Marjorie in Georgia. Welcome, everybody. And Lorraine in Texas. Okay, rained. It's been raining the last few days here in Los Angeles. Thank God we could use it. Whatever smoldering fire I would imagine is all gone by now. Now I'm a little worried about the hillsides and the mudslides. But please God, everybody should be safe and well. Our daf today is page 44 here in Tractate Sanhedrin, the 24th volume of the Talmud, continuing our discussion of Mishna number 3 here in chapter 6. We're talking about somebody who was a defendant in a death penalty case. He was convicted and is sentenced to execution. But there's these safeguards in place so that if somebody can come up with some late-breaking evidence or a late-breaking argument that will save him from execution, we're going to be able to stop the wheel, stop the process, stop this walk of the defendant out to the place of stoning. If the method of execution is by stoning, and that's the one that we've been talking about, although there are 4 kinds of court-ordered execution in the Torah. But we've been talking about a case where he's walking out to be the place of stoning. Okay, we picked this up right near the top of page 44a. When God explained to Joshua the reason for the Jewish people's defeat at the city of Ai, which we were talking about a little bit yesterday because of the story of this fellow Achan, who was guilty. He had been, he was guilty, some say, of many, many crimes, certainly some transgressions, and the fact that he was getting away with it, and that it involved, at the very least, taking property that they had captured in the spoils of war that Joshua had consecrated, for holy purposes, and this guy was keeping it for his own use, and that was becoming a stain, sort of a transgression that was affecting the fate of the Jewish people, and until they, rooted out the sinner among them, they were not going to be able to succeed in this war that they were engaged in, and so they discovered that this is the guy. And he confessed to his crimes, and then he was executed. A little bit problematic because there were no witnesses, and a confession will actually not lead to an execution because you don't have 2 witnesses, and you can't be your own witness against yourself. You're your own closest relative. However, there is this matter of confession that once the guy is sentenced to die, we encourage him to confess to his crime so that he can make an atonement, and so that his execution will actually be an atonement for him, so that he'll be in a much better place when he gets to the world to come, to the world of souls. And remember, we have this idea that it's not binary, right? The world to come or the next world to come, Olam Haba, has different meanings in Judaism, in the Jewish tradition. It can either mean the time of the resurrection, right? When Mashiach comes, when the Messiah comes, and the dead come back to life. That's known as Olam Haba. But it also means the afterlife, the world of souls. And in the world of souls, sometimes also called the Olam Shel Emes, the world of truth, there's an infinite number of levels. There's Gehenna, very painful, a place of spiritual cleansing and refinement, where you're going to be held to account for your sins. A little bit like what we imagine hell might be. Very difficult, very painful, but that's temporary for 99.999% of people who've ever lived. They'll probably spend some time in Gehenna, but it ends, and then they go on to their portion in the next world. What kind of a portion you have, like what neighborhood you're going to live in heaven, so to speak. There's an infinite number of neighborhoods, right? And so you're going to end up in a portion that is exactly correlated with the life that you lived. Although, you might actually rise, your elevation there might be greater, depending on if there are people back in this world, the living, who are doing mitzvahs, who are doing commandments, fulfilling commandments and obligations and doing good deeds in your name. That can actually give you an elevation a little bit higher in the world of souls. And that's why you'll often hear me when somebody donates to our nonprofit and makes a dedication in memory of someone who is departed. So, we bless them and pray for them that they should have a higher elevation in the world of souls, because of the merit of our learning should accrue to them. Okay, so this idea of making an atonement, a person who has committed a terrible crime and he's going to be executed for it, okay, that's going to be the end of his journey in this world, but he's still got a journey there. And even though he's committed this terrible crime, his execution can be an atonement for him if he confesses to his deed and accepts that he needs atonement. Somebody who doesn't want to atone, who refuses to acknowledge that they need to atone, well, they haven't made an atonement. Okay. When God explained to Joshua the reason for the Jewish people's defeat at the city of Ai, he said, I'm not even sure how to pronounce it, Ai. It's a funny name for a city, Ai. Right, and I think it's Ayin Yud with the A, so we're just going to say Ai, the city of Ai. Okay, so he said, Israel has sinned, right? God said, Israel has sinned. That's in Joshua 7:11. So Rabbi Abba Bar Zavda says, from here it may be inferred that even when the Jewish people have sinned, they are still called Israel. And Rabbi Abba says this is in accordance with the adage that people say, even when a myrtle is found among thorns, its name is myrtle, and people call it myrtle. So you're not going to lose your identity when you surround yourself with unsavory, even wicked people. You're still you, but your spiritual level will drop. We're advised many places by our sages to surround ourselves with good people, kind people, people that we want to be, aspire to be more like them. Not people who will bring us down, but rather people who will bring us up. The verse in Joshua continues, they have also transgressed my covenant, which I commanded them, and they have also taken of the dedicated, like consecrated property, and also stolen, and also dissembled, and also put it among their own goods. Right? This is the children of Israel coming out of the wilderness, going in to the promised land, and they have to fight these wars of conquest. But if their spiritual level is so uneven, they're not going to succeed. Right? So God is telling Joshua there's too much wickedness among the people. How much wickedness is that? Let's keep reading. Rabbi Ilya says in the name of Rabbi Yehuda bar Masparta, this teaches that Achan also transgressed all 5 books of the Torah, as the word also is stated here 5 times. Now, after this fellow, Achan, who was apparently very wicked and doing all different kinds of transgressions, so after he confessed and was executed, the people did win the war against Jericho. So it sounds like all the crimes that were being committed, it was this guy. He was really bringing down the level of the people. And Rabbi Ilya says further, in the name of Rabbi Yehuda bar Masparta, Achan, in the tradition, in addition to his other evil actions, would stretch his remaining foreskin in order to conceal the fact that he was circumcised. An allusion to this offense is found in the wording of this verse. Here, with regard to Achan, it is written, they have also transgressed my covenant. And there, with regard to circumcision, it is written, he has violated my covenant in Genesis 17:14. So the Gemara asks, isn't it obvious that he concealed his circumcision? As Rabbi Ilya said, that he transgressed all 5 books of the Torah. Somehow they've got a guy in their midst who's going out of his way to violate every law in the Torah. You know, this writer, kind of stunt writer, A.J. Jacobs, he did the year of living biblically, right? And so he tried to, even in the modern world, perform every commandment in the Torah. This guy, Achan, was trying to break every commandment in the Torah. The Gemara answers, lest you say that while Achan transgressed all 5 books of the Torah, with regard to a mitzvah relating to his own body, such as circumcision, he did not act irreverently. Rabbi Ilya teaches us that he sinned concerning this mitzvah as well. With regard to Achan, the verse states, quote, and because he has committed a wanton deed in Israel. Joshua 7:15. So Rabbi Abba Bar Zavda says, this teaches that Achan engaged in sexual intercourse with a betrothed young woman. And this offense is also alluded to by the wording of the verse. Here, with regard to Achan, it is written, and because he has committed a wanton deed. And there, with regard to a betrothed young woman who committed adultery, it is written, because she has committed a wanton deed in Israel, to play the harlot in her father's house. So the Gemara asks, isn't this obvious, as Achan transgressed the entire Torah? And the Gemara similarly answers, lest you say that he did not act irreverently to such an extent. Rabbi Abba Bar Zavda teaches us that he paid no heed even to this prohibition. Ravina said this verbal analogy does not teach what Achan's offense was. Rather, it teaches that his punishment was like that of a betrothed young woman who committed adultery, for which the punishment is execution by stoning. New subject. The exilarch said to Rav Huna, it is written, and Joshua took Achan the son of Zerah, and the silver, and the mantle, and the wedge of gold, and his sons, and his daughters, and his oxen, and his asses, and his sheep, and his tent, and all that he had, and all Israel with him. And all Israel stoned him with stones, and they burned them with fire, and stoned them with stones. That's Joshua 7:24-25. This guy Achan was really bad. And what happened to his assets and his relatives? What's going on? If Achan sinned so that he was liable to be stoned, did his sons and daughters also sin that they should be stoned? And Rav Huna said to the exilarch, and according to your reasoning, that Achan's family was also punished. If Achan sinned, did all of Israel sin? It says all of Israel went with him. Obviously, not all of Israel was executed, as it is written, and all Israel with him. So rather, what happened was that Joshua took all of the people to the valley of Achor, not to stone them, but to chastise them and strike fear into their hearts by making them witness the stoning of Achan, making an example of him and showing them, this behavior will not be tolerated. So too, he took Achan's household there in order to chastise them, right? You've got a bad seed in your midst. And the whole people has a bad seed in its midst, and especially Achan's family. You people need to distance yourself from this evil. With regard to Achan's punishment, the verse states, and they burned them with fire and stoned them with stones. So the Gemara asks, did they punish him with 2 punishments? So Ravina says, that which was fit for burning, for example, an item of clothing, was taken out for burning, and that which was fit for stoning, for example, an animal, was taken out for stoning. So nobody was going to inherit his clothing, his money, anything that Achan owned, not his animals. All of it was destroyed. Similar to when you have the law of a city, that city becomes idolatrous, a city within Israel where more than half of the people become idolaters, worshiping statues and whatnot. They're all executed. And all of the homes and property, everything is destroyed so that this, will be remembered, seen and remembered by all Israel, so they wouldn't go in that direction. New subject, but still about Achan. In his confession, Achan states, and I saw among the spoil a fine mantle of shinar and 200 shekels of silver. That's Joshua 7:21. So Rav says a mantle of shinar is a cloak of choice wool, and Shmuel says it is a garment dyed with alum. With regard to the spoils that Achan took for himself, that was the main crime that came up at this time. Turns out maybe he was already a wanton sinner in so many other ways, but the main thing was that booty, spoils of war that Joshua said were going to be consecrated for holy use, he had taken some of that for himself. So with regard to the spoils that Achan took for himself, the verse states, and they laid them out before the Lord. Joshua 7:23. So Rav Nachman says, Joshua came and cast down the spoils before God. And Joshua said to him, meaning Joshua said to God, Master of the universe, was it because of these, right? These items? I mean, they're not so many, they're not so significant, just these items. Was it because of these that the majority of the Sanhedrin were killed? As it is written, quote, and the men of Ai smote of them about 36 men. Right? That they had been winning all these battles, but now they lost because of Achan in their presence. And so Joshua is saying, it's because of this guy that he took this stuff that we lost 36 lives in Israel. And it is taught in the Baraisa, 36 men, right? 36. The majority of a Sanhedrin, right? A great Sanhedrin is 71, so the majority would be 36. 36 men literally were killed. This is the statement of Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Nehemiah said to Rav Nachman, but were they precisely 36 men? Didn't it state only about 36 men? So rather, this is a reference to Yair, the son of Menashe, who was killed, and who was himself equivalent in importance to the majority of the Sanhedrin, i.e. 36 men. He was a very prominent man, a great teacher and judge. Rav Nachman says that Rav says, what is the meaning of that which is written? The poor man speaks entreaties, but the rich man answers with impudence. Proverbs 18:23. The poor man speaks entreaties. This is a reference to Moses, who addressed God in a tone of supplication and appeasement. But the rich man answers with impudence. This is a reference to Joshua, who spoke to God in a belligerent manner. Is he challenging God and saying, God, you killed 36 men because this guy took some stuff? It's like challenging God's choice, challenging God's decision. So the Gemara asks, what is the reason that Joshua is considered to have answered God with impudence? If we say that it is because it is written and he laid them out before the Lord, and Rav Nachman says that this means Joshua came and cast the spoils down before God as part of his argument, well, this is difficult. Is that to say that Pinchas didn't act in the same way in the incident involving Zimri and Cosbi? Right? So after the king Balak, that foreign king, brought the prophet Bilam to try and curse the Jewish people, and Balaam said, I can only curse whom God curses or bless whom God blesses, and God has blessed the Jewish people. So Balak brought Balaam to curse the Jews, and Balaam blessed them 3 times. Balak was very frustrated. But it wasn't the end of Balaam, because Balaam was no friend to the Jewish people. It's just God wouldn't let him curse the Jewish people. But Balaam suggested that a way to defeat the Jewish people would be to send, beautiful young women to seduce Jewish men and entice them to commit idolatry, to go worship other gods. And that would be a very effective way to attack the Jewish people. And that's what they did, and it worked, right? And God was furious and sent a plague, and thousands of people were killed by this plague because of these young men who were, going after these, beautiful young priestesses, essentially, not just to have sex with them, but to then, bow down and worship idols. So once that plague got going, in the midst of that, a prince of one of the tribes brings in, this princess of one of these foreign tribes, idolatrous tribes, into the camp, into his tent, and is having sex with her. So Pinchas, the zealot, right, grandson of Aaron, takes a spear, goes in, and kills the two of them. That is the incident of Zimri and Cosbi. And it was the right thing to do because then the plague stopped, right? So it was you have to be very careful when you act like a zealot. You might be wrong. Pinchas happened to be right. So that's the incident that we're talking about here. So are we saying that Joshua was acting differently than Pinchas was acting? Is that to say that Pinchas did not act the same way in the incident involving Zimri and Cosbi? As it is written, then stood up Pinchas and executed judgment, vayifalel, and the plague was stayed. That's also mentioned in Psalm 106. And Rabbi Elazar says, and he prayed, vayispalel, is not stated. Rather, he executed judgment, vayifalel, is stated, which teaches that he entered into a judgment together with his creator. He didn't pray to God to take care of this. He took the action, counting on the fact that he would be right and that God would support him in this choice that he made. And he was right. But, not everybody would have such good judgment as Pinchas had in that moment. So he entered into a judgment together with his creator. How so? He came and cast Zimri and Cosbi down before God and said to God, Master of the universe, was it because of these sinners that 24,000 members of the Jewish people fell? As it is written, and those that died by the plague were 24,000. So rather, Joshua's belligerence is seen from this verse. Why have you brought this people over the Jordan? Joshua 7:7. Joshua says to God, why did you bring these people over the Jordan? As if he were complaining about God's treatment of Israel. But this too is difficult, as Moses also said a similar statement. Why have you dealt ill with this people? Why is it that you have sent me? Exodus 5:22, right? When he first starts asking Pharaoh to let the people go, and Pharaoh just makes their much worse, right? He says, oh, well, obviously they have a lot of time to kill, so now they can gather their own straw to make bricks. So their lives got harder. And then Moses says to God, why have you done this? Why have you done this to me? Was Moses, if you're saying that Joshua is being impudent, wasn't Moses impudent in the same way? So no, it must be something different that Joshua did. Rather, Joshua's belligerence is seen from here. From the continuation of the previously cited verse in Joshua, would that he had been content and had remained in the Transjordan. Now, with regard to the verse that states, and the Lord said to Joshua, get you up. Why do you lie this way on your face? In Joshua 7:10. So Rabbi Shela taught in a public lecture, the Holy One, blessed be he, said to Joshua, your own sin is even worse than that of the other Jews who sinned. As I said to the Jewish people, and it shall be, when you have gone over the Jordan, that you shall set up these stones, right? These stones that have the laws and the blessings and the curses in Deuteronomy 27:4. And you have already distanced yourselves 60 mil, which is like 60 miles, from the Jordan River, and you have yet to fulfill this commandment. After Rav Shela finished his lecture and went out, Rav, who had been present but remained silent, placed an interpreter alongside him who would repeat his lecture in a loud voice so that the public could hear it. And Rav taught, the verse states, as the Lord commanded Moses, his servant, so did Moses command Joshua. And so did Joshua. He left nothing undone of all that the Lord had commanded Moses. That's Joshua 11:15. So how can you say that Joshua left something undone? This indicates that Joshua could not have been guilty of a grave offense, such as delaying in setting up the stones. So if so, what is the meaning when the verse states, get you up, hinting that Joshua was in fact responsible for some kind of transgression? The matter should be understood as follows. God said to Joshua, you caused the Jewish people to sin, as had you not dedicated all the spoils of Jericho to the tabernacle treasury, the entire incident of Achan taking the spoils improperly would not have occurred. And this is what God said to him at Ai. And you shall do to Ai, at Ai, right, the city of Ai, and you shall do to Ai and her king as you did to Jericho and her king. Only its spoil and its cattle shall you take for a prey to yourselves. Prey. It's Joshua 8:2. Instructing Joshua that the Jewish people should keep the spoils. He, was a little bit too idealistic. He did more. He added to the commandments. Right? That's when you add to the commandments, you subtract. Right? So he did something that God did not ask him to do. It was all right for the people to take the spoils. His idea that we're going to dedicate the spoils on this particular battle was some idea that he came up with on his own, and it wasn't appropriate, and it led to this whole incident. The verse states, and it came to pass when Joshua was by Jericho that he lifted up his eyes and looked, and behold, a man stood over against him with his sword drawn in his hand. This is the appearance of the angel who's going to help them fight the battle. And Joshua went to him and said to him, are you for us or for our adversaries? And he said, no, but I am captain of the host of the Lord. I have now come. And Joshua fell on his face to the earth and he bowed down. And the Gemara asks, how could Joshua do so, bowing down to a stranger at night? But doesn't Rabbi Yochanan say it is prohibited for a person to greet another whom he does not recognize at night, as we are concerned that perhaps the one he doesn't recognize is a demon? Why was Joshua not concerned about this possibility? So the Gemara answers, it is different there. As the stranger said to Joshua, I am captain of the host of the Lord. I have now come. So the Gemara asks, but perhaps he was in fact a demon and he was lying. And the Gemara answers, it is learned as a tradition that demons do not utter the name of heaven in vain. And since this figure mentioned the name of heaven, he must have been speaking the truth. Now on page 44b. The Gemara understands the words of the angel that Joshua encountered as a rebuke for some offense that Joshua committed. And the angel said to Joshua, yesterday in the afternoon, you neglected sacrificing the daily afternoon offering because you were engaged in warfare. And now, when it is dark, you neglected Torah study. Joshua asked him, for which of these sins have you come to reprove me? The angel said to him, I have now come. I didn't come yesterday. I came now. So this is the sin that I'm reproving you for. The fact that I did not come before but wait until now, when it is dark, indicates that the sin of neglecting Torah study is the more severe one. Right? So all of the mitzvahs are important, but here it's saying that neglecting Torah study is more severe than neglecting to bring an offering in its time. We don't bring offerings anymore. What has replaced the offerings in Jewish worship, in Jewish service, right? And the avoda, in the holy service to God, what has replaced bringing offerings? Prayer. Right? So the three daily prayers that Jewish men are obligated in, the morning prayer, the afternoon prayer, and the evening prayer. Well, the morning prayer and the afternoon prayer have replaced the morning offerings that were brought in the holy temple or in the tabernacle in the wilderness, and the afternoon offerings. The evening prayer, that doesn't replace an offering because offerings were not brought at night, and that's why the morning and afternoon prayers are a Torah obligation. The evening prayer is just as much an obligation, but it's of rabbinic origin. But here, what it's saying is, prayer is very important. You must not miss prayer, but it's even worse to neglect your regular Torah study. Joshua immediately acted to rectify the matter by deciding that he must devote more time to Torah study. As it is stated, quote, and Joshua lodged that night. That's Joshua 8:9. Into the midst of the valley, Joshua 8:13. And Rabbi Yochanan says this teaches that he lodged all night in the depth of halacha, of Torah law, thereby atoning for his previous neglect of Torah study, which tells you if you miss a daf, you can make it up later. Shmuel Bar Unya says in the name of Rav, Torah study is greater than the sacrificing of the daily offerings. As it is stated, I have now come, demonstrating that the neglect of Torah study is a more serious offense than the neglect of the daily offerings. Abaye said to Rav Dimi, who descended to Babel from Eretz Yisrael. How do you explain this verse in the West, meaning in Eretz Yisrael? Do not proceed hastily to litigation, lest you know not what to do in the end of it, when your neighbor has put you to shame. Debate your cause with your neighbor, and do not reveal the secret of another. That's Proverbs 25, verses 8 and 9. Okay, let's start with, do not proceed hastily to litigation. Okay, good advice. And what else did it say? Because you don't know where it's going to end up. So avoid litigation in any time you can. And especially don't jump to litigation when your neighbor has put you to shame because you feel like you're being, assaulted by your neighbor who is trying to embarrass you with this litigation. Well, maybe you deserve it. So don't be so hasty to jump into litigation. Debate your cause with your neighbor, talk it out with him rather than take it to court. And do not reveal the secret of another. Certainly you don't want to be a gossip. So what else does this mean? Rav Dimi explained as follows. At the time that the Holy One, blessed be he, said to Ezekiel, go say to Israel, your father was an Amorite and your father a Hittite. That's Ezekiel 16:3. Meaning, well, Israel is very close to Hashem, to God. The children of Israel are, in some places in the Torah called the firstborn of Hashem. Special relationship with God, as it were, which really implies special obligations that we have, right? The Jewish people have so many more obligations than other people, and, so many ways in which we can come up short and fail to fulfill our obligations. So don't be so proud. You have opportunities to, fulfill your holy mission in this world, but you can fall short so easily, as we have so many times in history. So Ezekiel, right, who was definitely preaching to the Jewish people as a prophet that the Jewish people are falling short, right, left, and center. We're going to be punished for it. And don't be so proud, right, because your mother is an Amorite, and your father's an Amorite, and your father. Your father was an Amorite and your mother a Hittite. So when God said this to Ezekiel, the spirit Paskonet, which is another name for the angel Gabriel. Okay, so Gabriel is one of the archangels, right? Top level angels. The highest is Michael, whose name is God, right? So like God's chief representative when he needs an angel to do something. And also associated with chesed, right? Because God's attribute of kindness is always a little bit stronger than God's attribute of strict justice. Gabriel, who we're talking about here, is God's attribute of strict justice, but also kind of the warrior angel sent to do matters of war. So Michael and Gabriel, often kind of balancing each other. Okay, so Gabriel is who we're talking about here. Said before the Holy One, blessed be he, master of the universe, was the patriarch Abraham and the matriarch Sarah. Were the patriarch Abraham and the matriarch Sarah to come now and stand before you, would you speak to them in such a manner and put them to shame? Is it not stated, debate your cause with your neighbor and do not reveal the secret of another? It's fascinating dialogue here. God is telling Ezekiel as a prophet to chastise the Jewish people and tell them, don't be so haughty, right? You're descended from wicked people. Now the angel Gabriel says to God, why are you being so harsh on the Jewish people? Would you say this to their patriarch and matriarch, Abraham and Sarah, that they're descended from wicked people? And the Gemara asks, but does the angel Gabriel have so much authority that he could reprove God in such a manner? And the Gemara answers, yes. As Rabbi Yosef, the son of Rabbi Hanina, says, he, the angel Gabriel, has three names, Piskon, Itmon, and Sigron. He is called Piskon because he splits words and he argues with God on high. He is called Itmon because he conceals, She'otem, the sins of the Jewish people. And he is called Sigron because once he closes his arguments on behalf of the Jewish people, no one reopens the discussion. So fascinating. Usually Gabriel is kind of sent down here, when God needs to exact justice from someone. Right? I mean, it was Gabriel who was sent to destroy Sodom and Gomorrah. But here we see that Gabriel, his strong backbone, and God permits him to advocate on behalf of the Jewish people. Presumably he would be, on the other side of the bench where the Satan, the adversary, the prosecutor angel, would be accusing the Jewish people. So Gabriel taking up the argument in favor of the Jewish people. And God permits this because God doesn't really like to be surrounded by yes men, right? The angels, very, very limited ability to argue with God. That's more like us. We have that ability because we are independent. We have free will. The angels don't have so much free will. But apparently, Gabriel does. The verse states, had you prepared your prayers before your troubles came. That's Job 36:19. So Rabbi Lazar says, a person should always offer a prayer before trouble actually arrives. As, had the patriarch Abraham not anticipated the trouble at Ai, 400 years later, with the prayer that he offered between Bethel and Ai, there would have been, the city of Ai, there would have been no remnant or refugee remaining among the enemies of Israel, which is a euphemism for Israel itself, as Israel suffered a defeat at the city of Ai, from which there is ordinarily no recovery. Right? So the merit of Abraham saved us, and specifically this prayer that Abraham offered up in that location, saved us many generations later. And Reish Lakish says, the verse should be understood as follows. Anyone who concentrates himself and his energy in prayer, in the world below, will have no enemies in heaven above, causing him trouble. Rabbi Yochanan says, the verse should be understood in a slightly different manner. A person should always pray for mercy, that all heavenly beings should strengthen his power of prayer, and that he should have no enemies causing him trouble in heaven above. Let's remember what we just learned. Because especially when you think everyone goes through periods in their lives where you're just having troubles, right? Troubles coming out of nowhere. We all go through a bad streak, right? Even when things are going really well, and then suddenly stuff can come at you totally unexpected. What's going on? Where did this come from? Who are these people showing up to attack me? Why? So maybe you have an enemy in heaven who's, instigating forces against you here. What can we do? Number one, pray like we mean it, not just lip service to prayer. I mean, I'm guilty. I've been guilty many times. I was in a hurry. I prayed in the morning, but I rushed through it. I didn't have concentration in prayer. I need to atone for that. I need to do better. Sometimes we don't have time, but let's make sure that every time we pray, we at least hit some time in that prayer where it's utterly sincere and from the gut, and we mean it. And we only pray to God. Yeah, we only pray to God. But we could pray to God, please God, motivate my allies in heaven, or listen to the entreaties of my allies in heaven, that they should listen. That's not you don't pray, but you can ask, you can beseech, holy people who are living and who are no longer living, please, strengthen my prayer and pray on my behalf. God decides everything. We don't pray to other people. Well, we can ask them to help us, to add their prayers to ours, to strengthen our prayers, to pray on our behalf, etc. And to do that with some strength and seriousness. The Mishnah teaches, from where is it derived that Achan's confession achieved atonement for him? Right? So he confessed. At the end, he was executed, But look, he didn't lose his place in the world to come, is what we're learning here. His confession achieved atonement for him. How do we know that? The sages taught likewise in a Baraisa. From where is it derived that Achan's confession achieved atonement for him? As it is stated, and Joshua said, why have you brought trouble on us? The Lord shall trouble you this day. Joshua 7:25. Joshua said to Achan, on this day, your judgment, on this day of your judgment, you are troubled, but you will not be troubled in the world to come. And elsewhere it is written, and the sons of Zerah were Zimri, and Ethan, and Heman, and Kalkol, and Dara, 5 of them in all, 1 Chronicles 2:6. And what do the words 5 of them in all serve to teach? All 5 sons were destined to receive a share in the world to come. According to the sages, Zimri is Achan, the son of Zerah, as will be explained. Since Achan has a share in the world to come, his confession must have achieved atonement for him. In one place among the 5 sons of Zerah, it is written Zimri, without any mention of Achan. And in another place it is written, and Joshua took Achan, the son of Zerah. So Rav and Shmuel both say that Zimri and Achan are one and the same, but they disagree about his real name. One of them says his real name was Achan. Why then was he called Zimri? He was called Zimri because he acted like Zimri, i.e. just as Zimri engaged in sexual intercourse with a Midianite woman, Cosbi, Achan engaged in intercourse with a betrothed young woman. And the other one says his real name was Zimri. So why then was he called Achan? He was called Achan because he acted like a snake, she'iken, and caused the punishment of the sins of the Jewish people. Right? He caused trouble to the Jewish people through his own sin. The Mishnah teaches that back to our Mishnah, away from Joshua and Achan, back to our Mishnah about the one who was convicted of a death penalty offense and is being walked out to the place of stoning, and they encourage him to confess before he is executed. The Mishnah teaches that if the condemned man does not know how to confess, they say to him, say simply, let my death be an atonement for all my sins. Rabbi Yehuda says that if he knows that he was wrongfully convicted, he should say, let my death be an atonement for all my sins except for this sin. The sages counter that if such a confession is acceptable, anyone who is sentenced to execution would state that in order to clear himself in the eyes of the public. And the Gemara challenges, so let them clear themselves. Why should the court intervene if the condemned man wishes to proclaim his innocence? And the Gemara answers, they intervene so as not to cast aspersions on the courts and on the witnesses who testified against him. I'm almost done. Questions or comments? Please get them in now. The sages taught an incident occurred involving a person who was being taken out to be executed after having been convicted by the court. And he said, if I committed this sin for which I am being executed, let my sin not be an atonement for all my sins. But if I did not commit this sin for which I am being put to death, let my death be an atonement for all my sins. And the court that convicted me and all the people of Israel are clear of responsibility, but the witnesses who testified falsely against me will never be forgiven. And when the sages heard this, they said, it is impossible to bring him back to court and reconsider the verdict, as the decree has already been decreed. Rather, he shall be executed, and the chain of responsibility for his wrongful execution hangs around the necks of the witnesses. I mean, he spoke pretty confidently that they were false witnesses. We don't know that for sure. There's no evidence of that. But if it's true, then these witnesses will pay a price in this world and the next. The Gemara asks, isn't it obvious that he should be executed? Is it in his power to have his sentence overturned just because he says he is innocent? And the Gemara answers, no, it is necessary to state that the condemned man is executed even when the witnesses retracted their testimony. That's interesting. If the witnesses retracted their testimony, we still execute? The Gemara asks, even if the witnesses retracted their testimony, what of it? It is still clear that the condemned man is to be executed, as the law is that once a witness has stated his testimony, he may not then state a revision of that testimony. In other words, a witness's retraction of his testimony has no validity. And the Gemara answers, no, it is necessary to state that the condemned man is executed even when the witnesses retracted their testimony and gave an explanation for having lied in their initial statement. And this is like that incident involving Ba'aya, the tax collector, where it was discovered that witnesses had falsely accused the son of Rabbi Shimon ben Shattach in revenge for the sons having sentenced to death for sorcery, for the sons having been sentenced to death for sorcery. No, I'm sorry. In revenge for the sons having, this sentence is hard to read. This is like that incident involving Ba'aya the tax collector, where it was discovered that the witnesses had falsely accused the son of Rabbi Shimon ben Shattach in revenge for the fact that the son of Shimon ben Shattach was also a judge and sentenced to death for sorcery the relatives of these witnesses. So these witnesses were getting revenge on the son of Shimon ben Shattach because he had sentenced their relative to die, but this testimony was false testimony. We're not going to go into that story now because the hour is late, and we just completed our discussion of Mishnah number 3 here in chapter 6, and we'll pick it up tomorrow night, God willing, with Mishnah number 4 at the bottom of page 44b. Now Shabbos is ending later and later, so I've been getting on by 7:30. Tomorrow might be more like 7:40 p.m. Pacific. Okay, a couple of questions. This war strategy of Bilam, says Joseph, seems to be used to this day, exactly how cultural warfare is waged. If you can't destroy a people with bombs, do it with immorality. Just so. Sharon, my cousin Binyamin Eichner survived the Holocaust with several incredible events. One time he hid among Russian soldiers and convinced them he was not a Jew by tying a string from his mattress on himself and pulled to appear uncircumcised. Surely under these circumstances he is not condemned. His amazing stories of survival are written in a book called Passions of Israel by Leon Wolf. Wow, what a story. That's so intense. No, I'm sure he would not be condemned for that. There's an argument elsewhere in the Talmud whether it's permitted or obligated to bow to an idol in order to save your life. Right? You're obligated to, in other words, you're obligated to accept death rather than perform idolatry. Or some say that you're not obligated, right? That it's praiseworthy, to become a martyr rather than commit idolatry, but you're not obligated to do that. So I'm not sure exactly where the law comes out on that. I think we're actually obligated to accept death rather than bow to an idol, but you're not going to get a death penalty for that, and everyone's going to understand if you did that when you're actually facing a death. Somebody holds a gun to your head and says bow to that idol, and you do it. I mean, you don't really worship that idol, you're just trying to save your life. That's full-fledged idolatry. Pretending that you're not circumcised, that's not idolatry, right? That's just putting on a costume to save your life. So thank God that your cousin, that he survived, and under those terrible, terrible conditions. We can't even imagine what people have gone through during that period. Although we've heard stories about the hostages and what they've gone through since 10/7. Please God, may this war end. May all the hostages be returned, and may the war end with a secure and lasting peace for Eretz Yisrael and Am Yisrael. We say Amen. And may we all be blessed with an uplifting and joyful and healthy Shabbos. Good Shabbos. All the best.